Good morning, YouTube. Hope you're having a wonderful day. Today, we're going to make ourselves a map holder. Well, really, it's any kind of holder. You can hold a map, you can hold a picture, whatever you want it to hold. The sky's the limit. For this project, I am using hardwood for a border. That hardwood is red oak. Most people don't use red oak for furniture and things of that like because if water touches it, it gets this dark circle and you really can't get rid of that. So it's not great for furniture, but it is good for wall art and things of that nature. So if you can get away with hanging it on the wall, red oak is probably the cheapest hardwood that you can get outside of paint grade maple or poplar. But I don't get to choose the figuring of the maple or the poplar at my local sawmill. So that being said, red oak is the most consistent grain that I can find. It also smells like straw when you cut it, which is a surprisingly good thing when you're working with wood. I just like the smell of straw in the morning or at night, depending on, when you turn on your table saw. I know some of you get into the age where you got to do more woodworking in the morning, if you know what I mean. Initially, I just get all of them ripped to width, and now I'm going to cut them to length. You can do any size you want, ranging from 4 to 8 because I'm using a 4x8 sheet of plywood for this, all the way down to 2x3 if you want a little bitty thing. This project itself was 3 foot by 5 foot, so I cut my ends a little bit oversized. Went ahead and marked them on itself so that way I have a good reference point and use the chop saw to chop the wood. Once I get that done, I go ahead and cut a groove into these pieces. This groove will allow the plywood to actually sit inside of this. I'm being kind of crazy in this because I've never done this, and a client asked for this specific project, and I thought, oh, this would be a really cool way. I'm going to end up using a French cleat to hang this piece, and so I wanted to offset it just enough so the French cleat would sit flush on the back, and it looks like it's sitting perfectly flush with the wall, even though it does have a French cleat. So I measured in and made sure that I had enough space in between that first cut. So then I'm going to keep going and making small passes, taking away a little bit at a time. And eventually I'm going to fit it on the plywood to make sure I have the right amount cut away, and all of a sudden, boom, bang, snap, we're going to be working. These lousy homemade sawhorses don't do too good. May need to redesign them to do better. But always test fit your piece. Make sure you get it perfectly on there. I don't want any wiggle room. I want this to go on really snug. So I made sure to test moving it really slowly from the edge of the table saw's fence. Once I got the fit that I liked, I continued to finish up all the other pieces, and there it is. So I am using 1/2 inch plywood, and you can see my other mark there. I was off on my marking, but the table saw, because I have a job site saw and a terrible sawhorse, I got to clean up a lot of these pieces. So I went and bought a chisel. Thankfully, they were on sale. I got an awesome sale with these Narex chisels, and I decided to use them incorrectly. And actually using the chisel incorrectly worked way better than using it correctly. Am I the only one that's ever done this? I know that you're supposed to use them this way, but I think I was going against the grain, and it was just not working for me. And I just kept chipping it out, and thankfully no one's going to see this part, but let me know in the comments, what do you think? Is this the right way or wrong way to do this? Was there a better way to get this excess out? It's not my best work, but man, am I satisfied with my chisel working. It was the first time I've ever really used a high-end chisel, so not too shabby. So I got my plywood here. I'm gonna use my super fancy edge guide, which is another sheet of plywood. And in the middle of this, I was remaking my miter saw, and so you can see the former skeleton of the flip top saw that I used to use for my miter saw. It worked great, but ultimately it was a pain in the butt to flip it over and then flip it over and then flip it over and then flip it over. So if you're unaware, measure the blade to the edge of your fence to know how far away you have to measure from your line to put your edge guide. So for me, that was 1.5 inches on the smaller portion, and so I went ahead and added another 1.5 inches, and then I flipped it around and I measured the other way. Those little X's aren't for kisses, you know. Those are so I know which side to cut on, okay? I only write love letters to my wife. Thank you. Now, once you get your measurements correct, everything is pieced together, make sure you clamp that thing down, because the worst thing that can happen is as you're cutting, that piece moves. So make sure you use some super high quality squeeze clamps, or, you know, budget ones, whichever ones you currently have. Then go get your face mask, put that thing on, because sawdust apparently causes cancer in California, and then knock your piece right off. That might be some of the most frustrating things that I encounter in this small shop. I don't have a dedicated place to cut. Comment below if you also knock your things off periodically. And watch your fingers when you cut. Don't put your fingers all the way below. I was holding behind the cut, so that way when the piece falls, I don't have to let it fall on my nice beautiful toes. Make sure you do that quick math, because you gotta add so many inches based on these many inches and that many inches, and I really should have made plans for this thing beforehand. Oh, and don't forget your Festool W3000, handmade. It's a wonderful tool. But now that it's a little less than 4 foot, I can finally actually cut it down to final width, which is nice. The downside that I did with this homemade track saw is I didn't make it wide enough so my clamps actually catch on the Craftsman saw that I use. And so I do recommend that if you make this type of handmade track saw, you should make it wider than like 2 inches, because as you can see, boop, thankfully I think that, nope, I lied. So that's a constant issue for me, but we're checking square, 77.5, 77.5, right on. So now I get to do the fun part of trying to miter these corners, and that was surprisingly difficult. I went ahead and cut a 45 on one, and then I tried to cut a 45 on the others, and this was really, really hard. Because I inset that plywood, I didn't know the exact distance I needed to cut my 45s. So I put a mark, I cut it, I checked it, it didn't work. So I put another mark, and I realized that I have to mark the inside, not the outside of the wood, to get an accurate piece. So you can see there, I had still a little over 1/8 of an inch to chop off for it to fit perfectly, and there it is. So I did it with all the other ones, knowing my mistake. Went ahead and cut those 45s so I can get a really nice border all the way around, so this plywood would be fully enclosed. You always got to make sure that you are square. Once you know your 45s are dialed in, go ahead and chop all those other guys off, sneaking up on that line so that way you don't go past it, because the beautiful thing about wood is that you can chop it all up. But the hard thing about wood is it's very difficult sometimes to add wood back. So really sneak up on those lines. Don't you just love sanding? Just being able to just grab that orbital, throw it on your shop vac, and just go back and forth in a lateral motion. Doesn't you find it soothing? Just makes your life all that much better. Sanding. Now, of course, I did want to sand inside. I know no one will ever see it, but I don't know. Sometimes you just gotta make it your thing. No one will ever see it, but you know you did it correctly. So, do the job correctly. And theoretically, your clients will keep coming back. At least, that's what I tell myself. Got to soften those corners. While red oak is a hardwood, it's not the hardest of woods, and so it's perfect for a project like this where I'm just creating a frame that's going to hang on the wall. It takes stain super well. Now I get my $1 million glue applier. I thought it'd be funny and do a bottle flip with one of these glue bottles, and it landed on the top. So it turns out glue bottles are not the best thing to do bottle flips with. So if you're ever wondering what's the best bottle for bottle flips, talk about the most risky. A glue bottle. That's the most risky. So I went and found a scrap piece of wood and I shoved it in there, because if I just poured it from the open mouth, I'm trying to think of a way to say this correctly where you're not going to be like and you're not going to kill me in the comments with all of your talkity talk, clickety clack. Anyway, a lot comes out and I didn't want that. And I just pin nailed it in place with my super fancy and very expensive brad nailer there. Beautiful red color, tells you all that you need to know. I tacked on both sides. Get that thing out of the frame, Franklin. What the heck are you doing? The hard part was making sure I didn't actually accidentally go through the plywood on the underside. What I should have done is just put a mark all the way around it at the base of where the plywood is and gone a little bit above that mark. But my biggest fear was that I would go through on the top. Going through the bottom, yeah, it doesn't look good, but no one's gonna see it at least. Going through the top, on the other hand, everybody's gonna see it. So I continue to apply glue and attach these slides. They say that necessity is the mother of invention. I think necessity made the redneck. I think that's the most accurate statement you could say. But thankfully, all my measurements came out correct. Everything kind of squeezed together. And I'm super excited to show you this continued project. This long edge was very puckering, if you know what I mean. I only had a 15-minute working time for this glue, so I had to move quickly. So I shoved it on there, glued it up, put it on there, double checked it, and got those pin nails in there as soon as possible, because once this glue sets, I could have ripped it apart, but man, it would have just been nasty, and then I got to clean it all, and I just wanted to do it in one fell swoop. And I think I did it. I think it worked out really well, and I am pleasantly surprised with my capabilities on this project of a thing that I have never done before, and just thought, this is how I want to do it, and it worked out. And so look at this thing. I am surprised by how well I did this. So these are those miters. Not perfect by any means. I'm sure you've seen this before, but you can just take a screwdriver and kind of round over that miter, and it'll fold the wood in and kind of mold it together, and it'll really help that joint look really nice. And of course, give it a quick sand, make sure everything's flush with each other, and look how good that thing looks. It's not perfect, but man, most people wouldn't even know. And here's that French cleat. If you don't know what French cleat is, well, Franklin, first make sure you tighten your thing down. Goodness, that happens way too often. I'm sorry to admit. But a French cleat is just two opposing 45s hung against each other. It is one of the most simple ways to hang something. And so I cut both sides, and I made it extra long just in case. Here's what it looks like. One part's on the wall. Yeah, you stick it on the wall, and then that part's on the piece. Yep, it makes total sense, right? And then, sloop, they slide together. So just now all that's left, add the French cleat, pour it out, an astronomical amount. Man, I actually did really good here, huh? Look at that. They call me an artiste. But the nice thing about this French cleat is I'm going to butt it against the top, which means that if you level the French cleat, it will be level with the top of the frame. That means it'll look really pretty for all these interior designers that want, 0.0000001% degree on their leveling. Get your side tacked in, get the other side tacked in, and rapid fire. That's one of my favorite things to do with the nail gun. Shoot it as fast as I can. Here's the finished product. My shop is not big enough to really show it off, but these are kind of the best things that I have for it. The client is the one that stained it and put all of the matte pieces on it. So hope you enjoyed. I will see you in the next one.